All righty. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program, it's our All Things Latin America episode, and to a degree, All Things US America episode. And we are joined by a very special guest. We are joined by Carlito Rovira, a Puerto Rican. He's based in New York and is an incredible artist there, longtime elder to the Puerto Rican and broad Latinx community. He's a longtime activist and he's a veteran of the Young Lords. And I can't wait to learn from him and get responses to the questions I got prepared. So before we begin, Carlito, thank you so much for coming. It's been a long time coming, actually. So
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm happy that we finally got to do it after a year and a half that we've been talking about doing this.
exactly. In fact, actually, just before I ask my first question, uh, there was somebody that used to be on a Facebook group that were both in Blacks Against Capitalism, and I had reached out to him because he was an Afro Puerto Rican, and I had reached out to him asking him if he knew anybody from the Latinx community, from the Puerto Rican community, who I should seek out, to do one plus one, and he said, if there's anyone that you should talk to, it's definitely Carlito Rovira. So that's how we introduced. But for whatever reason, and it just took us a long time to finally link up and finally do this. So thank you very much for that. But he's disappeared from Facebook. I don't know where he is. Can't even.
What is his name?
I actually don't remember, and I've been trying to find, and I've been trying to find him, but it I think his Facebook got deactivated or something like that, but I will try to find him. But if he is out there and if he is watching this, make yourself known and thank you for getting Carlito linking up with me. So so it's a real honor to have you. And sorry about that. And my first question is this. Now, for the sake of time, we won't focus too much on the history of Puerto Rico, the armed resistance, as well as the nonviolent movement to American and ongoing American colonization of of your country. But I definitely want to do a proper episode, a whole episode just devoted to Puerto Rican politics and the history, as well as the debt crisis, because that really deserves a whole a whole show within itself. But my first question to you, however, is do tell us a bit about U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico and how and why you and your family became one of the many Puerto Rican diaspora folks, and how the U.S., this supposedly wonderful country with an abundance of opportunity, it's the land of the immigrants, it's the wonderful melting pot and whatnot. How the Puerto Ricans and by and large, Latino immigrant experience, whether it's legal or otherwise, is generally, it's not true. This wonderful fairy tale that that Americans, but sometimes even folks from the Puerto Rican, from Puerto Rico and other immigrants experience often feel the need to sadly engage with this. So so my first question is talk about how you and your family, immigrated from Puerto Rico to the U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico, and do push back against, this often American dream fairy tale that we often hear. Go right ahead.
I'll give you a couple of sentences of me personally. I was born in New York City. My parents met each other in New York City,
Okay.
and they were the subjects of this thing called Operation Bootstrap. And what Operation Bootstrap really was, uh, it was the consolidation, the period of consolidation of U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico. And this occurred after World War II. Okay.
Okay.
Um, Puerto Rico was prepared during the Second World War. It was prepared to take in the British Navy uh, because of the possibility that the Germans were going to invade and conquer England. And so the ports in Puerto Rico, specifically on the island of Vieques, it was being prepared to house the British Navy. Um, Operation Bootstrap was, as I mentioned, it was the consolidation of U.S. colonialism. But what did that mean exactly? It meant for the U.S. military to confiscate something like 14% of the country's lands to build military bases and installation. Today, Puerto Rico houses the U.S. Southern Command.
South.
And what does that mean? I mean, that means that it's the headquarters of the U.S. military forces that engage in invasions anywhere in Latin America and the Caribbean. The Bay of Pigs, the invasion of Grenada, the invasion of Haiti, the invasion of the Dominican Republic, they were launched from Puerto Rico. Needless to mention, the conquest of Panama. At the time that the Panama Canal was constructed, the headquarters for all of the operations was in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
So as I mentioned, 14% of the island's territory is devoted to that. At the same time that this is going on, um, the United Fruit Company was being catered to, and so were the various industries, specifically the pharmaceuticals. In the United States, 3 out of 5 aspirins that people take is manufactured in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Many of the medicines that you receive over in the Netherlands, in Germany, in England, and France, they come from Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Uh, Whenever there's new technologies in medical equipment, it's Puerto Rican technicians that go there to train technical folks of the with the new equipment. So Puerto Rico is not just a colony in the traditional sense. It is a capitalist colony. If it were to be independent tomorrow, it would possess the equivalent wealth as, let's say, Switzerland. That's small in territory, but is the bank of all the capitalist countries in Europe. You see, so Puerto Rico is not as poor as is projected to be. It has much wealth. The question is who controls it, and when we speak of control, that does not, it's not only restricted to the realm of economics.
Yeah.
It is also in the realm of politics. All of the elections in Puerto Rico, including the election of a dog catcher, that has to be approved by the U.S. Congress. Okay? Every
Wow.
election, every election in Puerto Rico is subject to annulment by the U.S. Congress. And this is not something that I'm making up. It's written in the U.S. laws. So when we talk about colonialism, the case of Puerto Rico being a capitalist colony does not make it any freer than, let's say, the colonies during the medieval period. Okay, it is much more intense. In fact, of all of the shipping that goes on, all of the trade, all of the imports in Puerto Rico is subject to the Jones Act. Now, what does that mean? That means they can only come on U.S. ships. They cannot come from a third country. If a third country wants to send products to Puerto Rico, those products first have to come to the United States to
Yeah.
then be shipped to Puerto Rico. If there are tomatoes that are grown in Puerto Rico, mind you, in Puerto Rico, if they are, harvested in Puerto Rico, they have to be packaged in the United States. Okay, they cannot be sold directly into the market in Puerto Rico. But that is the
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but let's unpack that. So, if you make a tomato, if you make a potato, if you make any type of food, okay, it's made in the farm in Puerto Rico, but then it very quickly has to go somewhere in the United States to be packaged there, and then sold back to Puerto Ricans.
It has to be sent back to Puerto Rico, and it explains why is it that the cost of living is a third higher than in the United States. Now, I like to go back to what I was explaining to you before about the pharmaceuticals. And this is a revelation that came out during the epidemic of HIV.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the HIV medicines that's distributed all over the world is manufactured in Puerto Rico. It is the leading industry in Puerto Rico. Mind you, medicine, the medical industrial complex is number 2 in the United States. Just to give you a vision of the scale of the magnitude of that industry, it is number 2 after the military industrial complex. Okay. Now, a lot of the HIV medicine that was produced in Puerto Rico has to come to the United States before it is seen in Puerto Rico. And what that did, it caused a havoc in Puerto Rico during the HIV epidemic, because the medicines that were manufactured there had to travel to the ports in the United States, processed, and then shipped to Puerto Rico. And what that did, it caused a shortage. It caused an actual shortage of HIV medicines in the country that manufactured them. Okay, so think about that for a little while, because that will explain or give you another vision of the meaning of U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico.
Unbelievable. And that is so that is so unbelievable. So obviously, because of this ridiculous racket that the U.S. inflicts on your people in Puerto Rico, that explains why so many immigrates to the U.S. But it's so ironic because at the same time, now you as a Puerto Rican, but as an American, because as you mentioned, you were born and bred, in the United States. You can vote for, well, yeah, because now you can vote for now if you're a Puerto Rican, and even if you're an immigrant Puerto Rican, moving to Chicago, California, Oklahoma, and so forth, you can vote for a president of the United States. You can vote for your mayor of Oklahoma City, New York City, San Francisco, and whatnot. You can vote for your Congress. You can vote for your Congress, city councilman, and so forth. But if you were to move back to Puerto Rico itself, you're not allowed to vote for who's going to be president of the United States and so forth. And yet America has so much control over how the politics are run, who is allowed to run, and so forth, correct?
Well, that's the fallacy of U.S. citizenship for Puerto Ricans. Uh, in 19 first, let me explain how is it that U.S. citizenship came about
Yeah.
in Puerto Rico. It was a couple of months before the U.S. declared war on Germany, during World War One, and
During World
they
War
were
One.
World War One,
Okay.
and what what it was intended for. It was part of the Jones Act. The Jones Act had many components. It had a lot of economic components, but it had this military component that Puerto Ricans were subject to selective service. Um, Now, here's where the hypocrisy sets in. It was made very clear in the Jones Act, in the statute where Puerto Ricans are made citizens, that they were no more than statutory citizens. I'll repeat that. Statutory citizenship. Okay.
That means
Puerto Ricans are the only ones in the world that have that status. Okay. It's called statutory citizenship. Now, when I first came across it years ago, uh, my only understanding of statutory is if you raped a minor. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Statutory rape.
yeah,
That was the only time that I understood that word to apply. Uh, then when I was studying the U.S. citizenship for Puerto Ricans, that was the official status, and it was a status that was approved by the Supreme Court in 1917. Now it was a compromise because there were many in the U.S. Congress that did not want to give Puerto Rican citizenship because they felt that Puerto Ricans were unworthy of U.S. citizenship. It's very similar to what they did to former enslaved people, former African enslaved people in the United States. The U.S. Congress did not want to give citizenship to Black people, and there were many battles over it. And so what is was practiced on the on Black people in the United States with second class citizenship for Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico, it is not de facto like for Black people. It is written in an actual sentence of law, of legality. Okay,
that's
I should say that the de
that's
facto, that the second class de facto status for African Americans also applies to Native Americans because they didn't want to give that citizenship to Native Americans either. Okay. Um, so going back to what I was telling you originally, Puerto Ricans are the only ones in the world that have such a status. Um, but it doesn't exempt you from being drafted, sent to the front lines, and die for the colonizers' cause.
wow. And here's me. I've seen great documentaries on on Puerto Rico, and we're going to be talking about the Young Lords and a fellow Young Lords veteran, Juan Gonzalez, who I believe our audience knows from Democracy Now and whatnot, and former columnist for the New York Daily News. I watched his the documentary based on his book Harvest of Empire, and even when you watch documentaries like that, it doesn't even get to the nitty gritty of just how much of a crock of, pardon my language, just a crock of shit and how awful it is to be a colony of the United States and so forth. And it just absolutely blows my mind. Anything else you want to say before we start
Well,
talking?
they had plenty of practice. Before they invaded Puerto Rico, they had plenty of practice. General Miles, who was responsible for the murder of hundreds of Native American people at Wounded Knee. He was the one that led the invasion of Puerto Rico. Okay, he
Wow.
was also the one that suppressed the Pullman strike of railroad workers prior to the invasion of Puerto Rico. The establishment of reservations was a form of colonization. The enslavement of Black people and the new forms that they developed to carry out black oppression afterwards, with a sharecropper, with you know, renting out prisoners, and so forth. That was part of the practice. They were exploring new ways to make money while entrenching themselves at the expense of the human rights of people. So by the time that they invaded Puerto Rico, they already had ample experience in subjugation. And that's important to understand. I mean, they became such experts that they used oppressed people against oppressed people. It's like when they recruited African Americans in the Buffalo Soldiers. And
Exactly.
what
Bob
was the
Marley got it
task?
wrong on that song.
What was the task of the Buffalo Soldiers? There's no glory in that. When I speak to black nationalists and they glorify the Buffalo Soldiers, I can't help it. I have to tell them those were murderers.
Exactly.
The Buffalo Soldiers were murderers. They carry out the task for white folks. They did the killing for white folks. Okay, they were the ones who went around to the indigenous peoples and did the scalping. So there was no glory in the Buffalo Soldiers. But again, this goes to show you the viciousness, and the deep seated experiences of imperialism. Okay, by the time the United States became an imperialist empire, they had an ample experience from their previous development.
Unbelievable. Before we start talking about the young lords, is there anything you want to share of stories your parents or grandparents told you about growing up in Puerto Rico or growing up in New York and so forth? And of course, and the racism they experienced, the racism you yourself are going to be experiencing, before you join the young lords and
Well,
whatnot.
my parents were members of the Nationalist Party.
Okay, interesting. And
My
explain to
parents,
our audience that.
my parents were members of the Nationalist Party, and they were secret members here in New York. There was a committee that was secret. And why emphasis on the secret part? Because the Nationalist Party was banned in Puerto Rico. We're talking about during the McCarthy era. The McCarthy era in Puerto Rico and for Puerto Ricans, period, was carried out with steroids.
Wow.
Okay, there was special emphasis. And this is something a lot of the white leftists don't really explain. That while the McCarthy era was targeting the communists and the working class movement in the United States, the McCarthy era was paying special attention to black and brown revolutionary entities. Okay, that's when COINTELPRO was developed in 1951. Okay, that's when there were many things going on. Puerto Ricans rebelled in 1950. And that's when you had the uprising known as Hayuya. Okay, the Chinese Revolution was still fresh. Okay, the socialist camp was at its high. You know, so there was a lot of there was a tug of war in the world, a tug of war that characterized the class struggle throughout the planet. You know, and the Puerto Rican liberation struggle was part and parcel of that.
That's incredible. And so you already came from a very radical left wing family and a Puerto Rican independence
My
family.
parents were my parents were revolutionary nationalists during that period, and they were part of the clandestine committee of the Nationalist Party here in New York City.
Unbelievable. And we're going to be talking more about COINTELPRO in a moment. I think what you already spoke about, perfect segue into this. Talk to us about the Young Lords. the many conditions of how the Young Lords came to be. Talk to us about the platform or the manifesto of the Young Lords, and while many would call the Young Lords leftists, some would call the Young Lords radical leftists, and some would even say Marxist because it's becoming less of a dirty word to say Marxist to say Marxist these days. I've heard you in many talks about the Young Lords. You've talked about how the Young Lords Manifesto was a communist one. So so after you tell us about the young lords and everything, my follow-up question is: do you think it's long overdue that the left, notably the Western left, but even others globally, should abandon and stop practicing their anti-communist leftism?
Um, Give me a second.
No problem.
Uh, um, I don't deal with semantics.
Okay.
Okay. Uh, as I mentioned before, the global class struggle of the 1950s. Let me pick this up.
No problem.
I'm having an interview right now, Papi. I have to call you back. Okay, post it. Okay, beautiful. It's another interview I got. Could you believe that? Uh,
No problem.
as I mentioned before, I try to get as explicit as much as possible about what was the characterization of the global class struggle at the height of the socialist camp, uh, immediately after the victorious Chinese Revolution, the Hayuya uprising. Okay, I mean there were skirmishes all over the world. The African nations had just become independent. Okay, imperialism was in retreat. The Viet Minh, the Viet Minh were already kicking ass. The French, the French didn't know what to do. They were getting dizzy from
Exactly.
getting clobbered in Africa, but also getting clobbered in Asia. You know, so the world class scenario was one of intensities, and Puerto Ricans were proudly part of that. Okay, where does the Young Lords come in? Well, I already mentioned about Operation Bootstrap. Between 1945 and the 1970s, the U.S. colonialism was not only consolidating, but rearranging its colonial presence in Puerto Rico. And that required expelling more than half of the Puerto Rican nation. Okay. Many of whom went to cities like Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, more recently, Orlando, Kissimmee, Florida, okay, in California, etc. You know, uh, and what we came across when we left Puerto Rico was a bunch of racist white folks. Puerto Ricans were not welcomed in New York City. Okay, and there's similar stories in the cities that I just mentioned. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie The West Side Story.
Unfortunately, yes.
Well, that was a musical that was based on that the plight of the Puerto Ricans who arrived to New York City. Okay, and we were met by Jewish and Italian gangs, and Puerto Rican families were usually confronted by Jewish and Italian gangs until the young lords started arming ourselves and patrolling the streets. Okay, and then the whole story changed when they saw that they can also bleed. Okay, um, and so we were very adamant about that. That we served and protected our people. Okay, and that's during the 1960s when oppressed people started exerting their right to armed self-defense, that there was a little bit more respect practiced towards black and brown.
Interesting.
So that is how the young lords came into being, uh, um, one, and it wasn't just in on the question of armed self-defense. It was exerting our rights to certain human rights. For example, the sanitation department, while it went into the white neighborhoods every day, they came into the black and brown neighborhood once a week. So there was always a stench here and there in the neighborhoods where black and Latino people lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day we decided that we were going to address that problem. And so we swept the streets and we took the garbage and we used the garbage, we weaponized the garbage and used it to block the main arteries to Manhattan, New York City. Put it in the middle of the avenues and just lit it up on fire.
Incredible.
That got their attention. Then that's when they started cleaning the black and Puerto Rican neighborhoods the way they were supposed to in the first place.
Incredible. And tell us and
I
tell us.
I mean, we took over Lincoln Hospital. We took over Lincoln Hospital because there were secret sterilizations going on in that hospital, just like the secret sterilizations in Puerto Rico. Uh, 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 they were following the practices and the policies of Cornelius Rhodes, which I like to encourage your viewers to research Cornelius Rhodes. Rhodes was a master at genocide. He was a U.S. military officer who was also a medical doctor, and he did committed many atrocities of genocide in Africa. In fact, there was a section of Africa that was named after him, Rhodesia.
You're talking about Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, who correct, right?
Yes, and he came to Puerto Rico. He went to a number of countries, and his motto of dealing with a birth is something that the Planned Parenthood was formed on. Okay, it was genocide, basically genocide, but it was genocide that was done on the sneak. In Puerto Rico, women of childbearing ages, or better yet, 1/3 of the childbearing female population was secretly sterilized. They would go into hospitals to, have their tonsils removed. And then they wound it up without their fallopian tubes. That's how it
Wow.
happened. There is a documentary called La Operación, which tells this story more, explicitly. And it was put together with the help of a number of medical personnel that were involved in that struggle.
Unbelievable. So talk to us a bit more about the incredible actions that the young lords did, and so when the young lords occupied a hospital in New York and demanding that the hospital stop its medical racism, so it was more than just going after the hospital for practicing medical racism, like not taking very seriously the symptoms of Puerto Rican and uh, other Latino patients' problems. It was also going after hospitals that actually were engaging in in other gross human rights abuses like
Well, it was
sterilization.
more than that, brother. It was more than that. Lincoln Hospital was so antiquated that it is where escaped African slaves. This is where they brought them to be examined. It was part of it was one of the stops of the Underground Railroad. They brought them to Lincoln Hospital just before they went on in their journeys. That's how old Lincoln Hospital was. It was rat and roach infested. Okay. If you went there to, you know, have a leg removed, they will remove the other leg, make mistakes like that. You would go in there to have a appendicitis operation and end up having a lung removed, or having tools, medical tools left inside of your body.
and
Okay.
and the doctors weren't doing this because they were just being because they were just and the doctors were doing this not because they were incompetent or it was grossly underfunded. No, they were purposely doing this because who cares about these black patients, who cares about these Latino patients, who cares about these Puerto Rican patients.
Neglect is part of a culture. Okay. Neglect, because I don't like to address intention. I never like to address intention because you can't read what's inside of a person's mind.
Yeah.
Okay. But when you look at the surrounding circumstances, when you look at history, when you look at social relations, that's where you find the answer. Okay. And neglect has become part of the culture in the United States. It's like racism, white supremacy in the United States, or rather in the world, it's become like the official religion. Okay. Where it's people are actually driven to believe that that is the norm.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the mistreatment of black and brown people in the United States is perceived, even by black and brown people, is perceived as normal. Okay. And that we should accept it. Okay. And then that's further enhanced by religion of, and I say all religions, religion encourages people to accept what is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so you occupy Lincoln Hospital, and yes, and talk to us about
The
what
result was that they built another Lincoln Hospital. And for the period, for the time, okay, it was state of the arts. Okay. 5 years later, there was a new Lincoln Hospital created, and it was state of the arts for that time.
but, I we have to paint this picture for our audience. The young lords took arms, occupied Lincoln Hospital, and demanded that the doctors and the nurses and the personnel stop practicing medical racism and so forth. You made sure that patients were being properly treated and so forth. How
No,
now?
we did not take over Lincoln Hospital with arms. We only used arms once, and that was at the
Okay,
taking of the Second People's Church. And that was because one of our members was killed by corrections officers. Okay. And to demonstrate a point, we seized control of the First Spanish Methodist Church, which we renamed the People's Church. And we took that over with weapons, with shotguns and carbines.
but but that's so incredible. But I cannot imagine anybody doing something like that, especially with how with all the steroids that the police have been taking and so
Well,
forth.
I wouldn't recommend anybody doing something like that today. Okay, with the repressive atmosphere that exists.
Yeah,
What I am mentioning here on your show is something that is well documented in history.
incredible. And you may talk to us about some talk to us about some of the positive long-lasting impacts of the actions that the young lords took at Lincoln Hospital, because I believe it was that, as well as some of the free clinics that the Black Panthers were doing, that very much helped cement and advance the healthcare as a right movement, the single payer healthcare, social justice, racial justice movement. Correct?
Well, first and foremost, the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords, we were
Yeah.
fraternal allies, and we functioned as one. And they were doing different aspects of it. In many cases, they trained us. Uh, and when we took over Lincoln Hospital, they were assisting us. Okay. Uh, you know, the patient's Bill of Rights, which was unheard of, okay, was it was developed by a sister who was in the Black Panther Party and then the Young Lords. Her name was Cleo Silvers. Uh, and last month she passed away.
Oh,
She
sorry to
was,
hear that.
yes, she was the author of the Patient's Bill of Rights, and it's something that still exists today. Now, what is the Patient's Bill of Rights? Well, I have a right to ask a doctor for their credentials. Okay, I want to make sure that you're not a quack. Okay, I, I don't want no auto mechanic to come over to me and cut me open.
Yeah.
Okay, or look up my ass or whatever it is. Okay. Uh, Also, the patient's Bill of Rights, the patient has the right to know what is it that they're recommending as medicine, okay? And the reasoning why they're being prescribed that, okay? There are many things. And now the way they try to counter the patient's Bill of Rights is that when you go into a hospital, they make you sign some papers saying that, you're giving permission to the doctor just in case they screw up. that but you gave permission, okay? They try to find ways to undercut
Yeah.
the what has been an achievement of the people's struggles, okay? And the Patient Bill of Rights was a big achievement because it symbolized the struggles of Black and brown people challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
And that was something that even white people in the United States benefited from. It's like when African Americans were demanding of education, white folks also benefited from that demand.
That's so incredible. And with that, can you talk a bit more about what was in the Young Lords' manifesto and so forth,
Well,
and why
I'll
you proudly call it a communist manifesto?
well, I that is not everyone. Amongst the former members of the Young Lords, there are many differences.
Okay.
Uh, I went on to become a communist. Okay. Um, we studied, and this is something that I always pull out of the hat to repel some of the anti-communists in that were members of the Young Lords. Okay, we studied Marxism. I'll even tell you what the books were. We studied anti-Düring. We studied the Communist Manifesto. We studied Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. We studied socialism, utopia. Uh, we studied the origins of the family, private property, and the state. I can go on all day telling you what we studied. We studied Frantz Fanon. Okay, we studied the speeches of Che Guevara, the speeches of Fidel Castro. You know, uh, and they were mandatory classes.
Yeah.
You were suspended, if not expelled, from the organization if you failed to attend the political education classes, you know. And it is where I became a communist in the Young Lords. Now, when you look at the 13-point program, the first point, we want liberation for Puerto Rico. We want liberation for Puerto Rico, independence on the island, and self-determination in the United States. Number two, we want liberation for all Latinos. Number three, we want freedom for all oppressed people. Okay? And I'll go on. Point number 13, we want a socialist society. Now, I like to ask anyone, especially the anti-communist former Young Lords, what part of the 13-point program was not communist oriented? Okay. In fact, point number 6 of the 13-point program. We are anti-capitalists and oppose alliances with traitors. Okay, so when you look at the Young Lords 13-point program, it's founded on communist principles. Okay, and sometimes it explains why is it that many of these cats don't like to they like to glorify the history of the Young Lords, but they do not like to talk about the 13-point program. You see, because when you glorify the past, you can twist it around and make it apply where it doesn't apply today. A lot of these individuals, and you mentioned some of the names, they're with the Democratic Party today. They glorify, if they're not card-carrying members of the Democratic Party, they glorify the politics of the Democratic Party. And that's where we differ.
And well, before we talk a bit more about COINTELPRO, then I do have to ask this: do you think it's long overdue that whatever we call the left, but that whether it's the Western left or anyone in the global left, stop practicing anti-communist leftism because it's like scoring a goal against yourself. It's just engaging in self-McCarthyism. I'm very curious your response on that.
Now, what is left is relative. Okay, what is left is relative. Okay, everything has a left, depending on where you stand. Okay, yeah. There's a left in the Democratic Party. There's a left in the ruling class. There's a left inside of communist organizations, just like there is a right.
Exactly. I often use the term sometimes that we have many people who are left leaning, but are they left wing? Well,
I never like to use that term unless I'm inferring to left from what. Okay, because everything has a left. Leon Trotsky was left to Stalin. Okay, so it we have to put it in proper context. What is the movement of opposition to bourgeois rule? That's what we have to ask ourselves. And the reason why I take that disposition is because the U.S. left, I don't know what it is like in your country, but the U.S. left in the 1970s, one of the things that helped destroy it was that they got hung up on the Stalin Trotsky nonsense. Okay.
It unfortunately is still like that today.
Well, I give credence to Leon Trotsky, but I am not going to be attacking Stalin. Okay, because that was a beef amongst brothers. Okay, because as much as I would side with Trotsky, I would not say that Stalin came from the bourgeois camp, Stalinism. Mm-hmm. No, Stalinism came from the Revolutionary International Movement. It came from communism. It came from the working class. Okay. Now, was there an internal beef going on? Yes. Okay. Just like as much as there was an internal beef between Eldridge Cleaver and Huey P. Newton.
Yeah.
Okay. There's always going to be that. It's always going to be dynamics because that's part of nature. There's dynamics in chemistry, in astrology, in everything, in politics, especially in politics. Okay. The question is, how is it that you deal with it? Okay. In the Cuban Communist Party, for example, and this has been told to me by Cuban emissaries, in the Cuban Communist Party, you have all the trends. You have the trends, what is known as the Leon Trotsky trend and the Stalin trend, and I mean, but that's natural. Okay, that is natural, And what's important is who can throw the best punch at the oppressors, who can organize the best to undermine capitalism. Okay, who can organize the working class, because it always goes back to that. Okay, don't masturbate inside your head as to what sounds pretty. Okay, because what sounds good is not what I'm after. I want to see what's good, and what defines what is good is who's able to organize the masses, the thing that the bourgeois dreads the most.
Great
That's what's
answer.
important.
Great response. And
Because we had differences in the Young Lords. We had a right and a left. Okay, and we didn't handle it very well. We did not, and we went at each other's throats at the end. Okay, and I have to add to that, to everything that I said. You need the dynamics, because nothing moves, nothing develops unless there is a dialogue, unless there is that struggle, unless there is that exchange. In American history, the working class movement has not known anything other than that.
yeah,
Amongst the abolitionists, there was that dynamic. There were the struggle, the struggle of perspectives. Okay, and it's what moves things forward, and that is something that we have to accept.
well, but at the same time, there is that weakness of of infighting too much, and our enemies use it to their benefit, which is a perfect segue to this question. So you already talked about how you already talked to us about how McCarthyism it was already being unleashed on steroids in Puerto Rico, and that the first
Against the Nationalist Party.
yeah, and that COINTELPRO was already existing in the in the U.S. and in its colonies way before the 1960s. So that's a perfect segue to talk to us about COINTELPRO. So tell us about the U.S. deep state via the FBI led by J. Edgar Hoover. Talk to us about their war on the Young Lords. If you want, you can also talk to us about its war on other people power groups, from the Black Panthers, AIM, the American Indian Movement, Chicano, and other Latinx leftist groups, even feminist groups, and several other people power movements. Nobody was spared by the FBI, which is just an extension of the U.S. government's war on them. What do you remember experiencing? And then, years later, what are some things you thought was so messed up, and then it later turned out, aha, it was COINTELPRO. That makes sense now. I'm curious your response.
I'd just like to start off, to answer your question by emphasizing that nothing started with COINTELPRO. Okay, the subversive activities of the state began immediately after Shays' rebellion. Okay, after and for the listeners who don't know what Shays' rebellion is, these were farmers and workers who fought in George Washington's army.
Yeah.
And when they discovered that the Constitution was not going to apply to their rights when it was being written up, they rebelled. And what happened immediately was that there were spies sent amongst the rebellious, followers of Shay. And right after that, the state, as it became more and more consolidated, because consolidation is ongoing. There's no beginning and end. The more the U.S. Government existed, the more consolidation that state underwent. And I'd like to fast forward it. They had spies American spies in not only in the Confederacy, but they had spies in the amongst the abolitionists. The U.S. government has spies amongst the abolitionists. That's right. Because they wanted to know, Lincoln wanted to know what the hell the abolitionists were doing. And keep in mind that at the reason what motivated the U.S. bourgeois to do that was that the abolitionist movement was, you know, greatly supported by Karl Marx. Okay, and the Working Men's Association in England. Okay, and don't forget that Karl Marx used to correspond with Lincoln, and I'm pretty sure that in those letters, Lincoln was psychoanalyzing Marx, just the other, same thing was going on the other way around. Um, and they knew by that time that what communism represented was the demise of capitalism, and this is at a time that the capitalist class was trying to get on its feet. Okay, um, and a few years after the demise of the power of the slave owners, that's when the working class movement in this country really accelerated. The movement for the 8-hour day, and the right to unionize, and that required, the government hiring the Pinkertons, and the Pinkertons were doing the spying as well as the repressing and the killing of labor leaders and labor organizers. Uh, by the end of the 1800s, we come across the Attorney General Palmer, who hired the rookie. One of his mentees was J. Edgar Hoover. Okay,
Yeah.
uh, and this is like way before the creation of the FBI. And J. Edgar Hoover just took it to the next level of that consolidation. You know, and that's when he started spying on Marcus Garvey and the Marcus Garvey movement, and I mean he did all kinds of shit to Marcus Garvey, and it was really a prelude to what happened decades later. It was first started with Marcus Garvey, um, because it was a reflection how they wanted to end chattel slavery, but they did not want to end black subjugation.
Exactly.
Okay, and that was the role that Palmer and J. Edgar Hoover played. Okay, their role was to you know prevent prevent the strengthening of the working class movement. And one of the things that they did to make sure that it didn't develop that strength was to keep black separated from white. And that's when you had the Jim Crow laws come in and establish. Jim Crow laws really helped in the consolidation of the bourgeois state in the United States. It was more than
Racial
fostering
segregation.
discrimination. It was something that was required for them to consolidate the bourgeois state.
And and tell us a bit more about COINTEL's impacts on the young lords and
Well, they were spying on us. They were spying on us. They were sending letters to branches. It was like, sending FU letters on the internet. Well, in those days, there was no internet, but we received letters from, let's say, in New York, we would receive a letter from a branch in Cincinnati. And it was like, it was provocative.
yeah,
Um, they would, their agents would establish relations with members, to find things out. There was a drug element. Uh, it would bring drugs and introduce them in parties. Get everybody stoned, and then go to work asking people questions or in conversations. In a very enticing way. Uh, you know, they they did a number of things, and but the highlight, I would say, the climax of their operations was in 1975, 76, when the organization engaged in violence against itself.
Mm.
A smaller scale of what happened to the Black Panther Party. What happened to the Panthers was a little bit more intense. Panthers were shooting at each other. Okay. uh, um, and this was started with a contradiction between two leaders, two of the principal leaders, Eldridge Cleaver and on the one hand, and Huey P. Newton on the other. And we took a principled stand, and we begged both factions to stop it. Okay, we did a public statement that we begged them, to come back together and work things out. It didn't work. They went about to heighten the conflict, and we know what happened from there on. It dissolved the organization. You know,
Um,
and
Go ahead. Go ahead.
and although the state succeeded in destroying these entities, there's a lesson that lives forever, and that is that a people's movement cannot afford not organizing a disciplined military structure. Because you need a vanguard leadership that is more sophisticated than the sophistication of the entities that oppress them. Okay, we need to be better scholars. We need to be better politicians. We need to be better at everything. Okay, I'm an artist. I need to be a better artist than their artists. Okay, because they use art as propaganda against us every day.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to be more sophisticated than they are in everything.
A quick follow-up question about COINTELPRO. Is there anything about COINTELPRO that you look back and you think that was weird, but then when new things become declassified, you go, oh, okay, now that makes perfect sense.
The thing because I don't like to go back in time.
Fair, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
I don't like going back in time. I didn't want to. I didn't want to apply to get my FBI files and any of that. We don't want to know. There's things that we don't want to know. Okay. The thing to do is to develop a disposition in moving forward.
yeah.
We need to guard against gossipers. We need to guard against those that encourage petty discourse. Okay, because there was the operations of the government, but then there were our weaknesses. You gotta look at things scientifically. Um, they would have not been successful if we did not give them the opportunity. Okay. One of the things, one of the experiences of the Bolsheviks was that the Bolsheviks were tight knitted, and they found an informant, and they found several informants. And Lenin was asked, what should we do with them? Should we shoot them? Should we do this or that to them? And Lenin said, no, let them work. Let them work. Put them to work. Okay. And that's precisely what happened. They were kept separate, but they were given tasks, and they carried them out. Okay. And they watched them. They watched them carefully. You know, I always encourage people today that one of the things that allowed COINTELPRO to succeed was those that encourage or fester petty discourse. That's what we have to guard against.
and still is a huge, and that's still unfortunately is a huge problem
Hmm.
on the left. Not just in the U.S. Having been to England a couple of
Everywhere,
times, I've seen it, and
everywhere.
being in touch with a lot of my Canadian comrades, I see it, and it's just unbelievable.
And that was the way, that a lot of these revolutionary experiences discovered who was it that was a mole amongst them. Those that were trying to promote disunity.
Exactly. Now that's a perfect segue then to this question. We've been talking about the FBI, the police, and so forth, and your people, the Latinx community, are no stranger to state terrorism from police brutality, and of course over incarceration, terrible outcomes, xenophobia, and whatnot. Call it neo-Keynesian, call it new Jim Crow policies from broken windows theories, stop and frisk, welfare to work, and of course for I hate the term illegal, but for the illegal Latinx people, we know that it's a double and triple hell what they go through when it comes to ICE, racist militias, and whatnot. With respect to police terror, I'm curious, where do you stand on what to do with the police? Are you for radical reforms like demilitarization of the police, ending the drug war, what Glenn Ford was an advocate of, community control over the police, ending private prisons, etc.? Or are you for, well, I know for a fact you probably are yes to all of that, but are you more for, or are you more for, abolishing the police? And if you're for one rather than the other, please do explain why. Very curious your response.
You cannot reform something that was created to catch slaves. You cannot reform something that was created to enhance the power of the oppressors and exploiters. So automatically you would have to, call for the abolition of the police. There's no other, solution. Now, if Joe Blow on the street came to me, who was sucking up on the, propaganda Kool-Aid, okay, and tells me, but we need protection, I say that that's something that we have to address ourselves. Okay, the people are the best ones to protect themselves. Okay, in Cuba, for example, the police is subject to recall. That's right. In the early days of the Russian Revolution, and of the Chinese Revolution, and the Vietnamese Revolution, the people had the right to recall police officers, and they had to be approved. They had to be approved if they were going to work in those communities. They had to be approved by that community.
That's
Okay. And so when you talk about the police is not supposed to be militarized. The police is supposed to be something that is governed by a community. They're part of the state, but there's a misinterpretation of what the state is. The state is the people, people's control. Okay, in bourgeois society, we understand the model of bourgeois society to be the state, and it's understandable why, because it's the only model we have.
yeah.
Okay, but when you tell people that there is another alternative to a state that's controlled by the people, where the people have the powers of check and balances, whatever that may be. Okay, when you explain that to people, it's like unimaginable. Why? Because the repressive state of the bourgeois is the only model of the state that people have in their minds.
Yeah.
So when you ask me, can we survive by abolishing the police? Of course. Just like you will survive if you had a cancerous tumor removed.
that's
You will survive
yeah.
if you did not have a boot on your neck like George Floyd.
So long term wise in the United States, definitely for abolishing the
Look,
police.
they
But it's
talk a lot about they talk a lot about safety. They talk a lot about safety, the safety of the public. The public is not safe now. The public is not safe with all the cuts in Medicaid, Social Security, the layoffs, evictions. You know, that's crime. Okay, that eventually results in a death. So when you talk about safety, what the hell are you talking about, really? You mean to tell me that the drug addict that's looking for a fix and wants to snatch a purse is more dangerous than this other clown that's trying to take away all of the things that I need in order to sustain myself and be able to survive?
lots of pawns are on. Lots of pawns are on. But that thing, but
At the same time, provoking war with Venezuela? Okay, come on. It's,
well,
it's, it's, it's that simple. Yes, the police needs to be abolished.
actually, that's a perfect segue to this question, and this is and that's all, and that's foreign policy. Now, obviously, from talking to you, you're a Cuba solidarity man. You're a Venezuela and Nicaragua solidarity man. You're consistently anti-imperialist. You're not selectively anti-war. So I wanted to know how do you explain, Latinos and Latinas, many of them who know that the U.S. is the root of all evil in the region, and so some are refugees. Some, of course, are illegals. There are people who are, who flee to the U.S. hoping for a better life, and yet some of these, Latinos are hostile to Cuba and support the embargo. Then there are others who recycle the propaganda that Daniel Ortega is growing increasingly authoritarian. And then there are others who say that both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro are communist dictators. And you see these kind of, Latinos like Gabriel Boric of Chile, Residente, Be Real of Cypress Hill, Norin DJ Effin. So how do you approach one of these, Latinx folks who, assuming they don't have far right skeletons in their closets, and some of them might have legitimate grievances with past, Cuban government under, Fidel or Chavez or Maduro or Daniel Ortega? Explain to me, how do you approach these people and explain to them that trying to influence the U.S. government, be it Republican or Democrat, is not the right way forward? I'm curious your response.
You're asking a question that requires the blueprint. There is no blueprint. Okay. Uh, the reason why, backward elements exist is, when there's a vacuum. Okay. That vacuum did not exist in the 1960s and 70s the way it exists today. Why? Because there was a movement. There was a militant mass movement that engulfed the entire population. There was a militant movement that removed neutrality off the table. Everybody was consumed. You were compelled, you were forced to take a stance one way or another. In the United States, there was the Vietnam War, with children coming back with no eyes and no arms. Okay? There was the Black struggle that emboldened not just Black people, it emboldened Puerto Ricans, it emboldened Native Americans, it emboldened the Chicanos, it emboldened the labor movement. Okay? So everyone was influenced, whether implicitly or explicitly, to fight.
Yeah.
Okay? And when that happens, even the backward are scared to show their ass. Okay? It's like I told you before, when white racists started seeing that black people were, buying guns and saying, we have the right of armed self-defense. They started, rethinking, rethinking their, about their superiority. Okay, because prior to the 1960s, they walked around like they were bulletproof. Okay, and when black and brown people started, you know, uh, mimicking the stance of the Black Panther Party. Okay, uh, they started like backing up a little bit. When there's a movement, when there's a movement, it has a psychological impact on the entire population, pro or con. Okay, what's most significant about it is that the area of neutrality is sort of like you know nearly vanishes, and even liberals tend to lean towards the left. Okay, when there's a movement, when there's a mass movement of opposition, even the liberals tend to go to the left. It's not like the liberals today. Sometimes you can't distinguish, what is right wing from the liberals. Okay,
Exactly.
because the liberals are opportunists, and they will go wherever the strength, the gravitational pull is coming from.
Yeah.
So I hope I'm answering that question. How is it that can be addressed? Well, we need a movement. We need a movement, and we wouldn't have so many uh, idiots that are Latinos and are pro-Trump, and then end up getting arrested and being deported. There was a man there was a man who was in handcuffs by ICE, okay, getting deported, and he had a T-shirt on that said Trump 2024. Okay, give me a break. Okay, uh, uh, that happens. That happens only when there's no movement.
And
Okay, or a Cuban who flees Cuba and then ends up being a homeless on the street over here. And I know of a case where that happened, where it was a Cuban hip hop group. One of the members of the band of the group defected and then regretted defecting, wanted to come back, and the Cubans told him, you got to wait 5 years, brother. He went to the Cuban embassy in D.C., and they told him, no, you got to wait 5 years
but
before you be allowed to come back.
but
That was his punishment.
but let's talk about that, because I think because the Cuban immigrants, some who are very hostile towards the Cuban Revolution. Is there just a lot of misplaced anger where a lot of them, okay, the ones who escape out of Cuba and want this American dream and so forth? Is it really just lack of education that they just don't have somebody who says to them, look, the Cuban Revolution could be even better if it wasn't for the Yankees who are bleeding us dry. And then when they do come to Miami or wherever and they find a community, it's mostly a community of Cubans with far right skeletons in their
Well,
life.
listen, we have to be realistic.
Yeah.
Progressives and revolutionary minded people have to be progressive. I mean, smart and tactful. We have to be honest enough to acknowledge that the economic blockade, the U.S. economic blockade against Cuba, has had a tremendous impact. And what that will do, it will disillusion people. It will cut into the fiber of enthusiasm, the fiber of struggle. It will do all of that. And the more backward elements, okay, because not, consciousness in the world is not at an equal level. consciousness, varies. It ranges from lower to higher. Those with the least amount of consciousness, political consciousness, revolutionary enthusiasm, okay, they will tend to blame their surroundings on the government of Cuba. And the Cubans themselves, the Cuban revolutionary government understands this. Okay. Um, Now,
And you could say the same thing of towards somebody from Venezuela or somebody from Nicaragua.
absolutely. People do not uproot like my parents. People do not uproot and go to a strange land where they don't speak the language because they want to hang out. That happens only out of necessity. Okay.
Yeah,
It wasn't the same for Puerto Ricans as it was for Cubans, as it was for Venezuelans or Mexicans, but fundamentally, it's for the same reason. People come to this country to look for a better life. It's no different. It's no different than those Eastern European Slavs or the Italian migrants or the Jews that came to this country uh, uh, in desperation because they were being persecuted and they were experiencing poverty. Okay. And when human beings experience hardship, they look to, look for a way out. And migrating is something that has happened since the dawn of humanity. That's how human beings were able to populate the entire world
exactly.
because they migrated all over the planet. Okay, and people change their pigmentation changed according to the regions in which they migrated to.
But then I want, but I wonder how, but I wonder. Okay, say say I meet somebody from Nicaragua who was fleeing the country because of well, I mean, I would say to them that you're fleeing the country because of Western imperialism. If your services aren't great, it's because of Western imperialism. But let's say you do meet, somebody from Venezuela or somebody from Cuba who has legitimate grievances against the government. How do we say to them, okay, I feel bad for you, but you know that supporting imperialism is not going to bring anything better?
Those are questions, brother. Those are questions that can only be answered in the given scenario. Okay. It's not something that there's an answer book for.
Mm.
Okay. Those are responses. I would shake hands and say how you doing, bro, and keep it at that. Okay. There's always a way to penetrate the hearts and minds of people. It doesn't have to be rigid. Okay. That this is the way you got to understand this. That's the mistake of the left, not just in the US, but everywhere. You got to learn to talk to people. Okay. I know gangsters. I know people out from the streets, and just like I know, professors in universities. Okay. You got to learn how to talk to people. It's that simple, you know?
And and do you think that that's where uh, more work needs to be done in just political education and explaining to people what imperialism and
I'll take you back to what I previously said. We need a new movement. We need a new movement in the United States. We need a new movement in the Netherlands. We need a new movement in France, et cetera, et cetera. The international revolutionary movement took some hits. It took some hits, you know. China was revolutionary at one time. And today that's not necessarily the case. It's in opposition to imperialism, but it's really on the defensive, okay? Because it doesn't have that revolutionary ferment that it once had, okay? It's surviving due to the ferment of the 1949 revolution, okay? Just like Russia is surviving because of the ferment of the Russian Revolution. Okay, that's why it's able to challenge the U.S. continuously, continue its challenge against the U.S. encroachment of Russia. Not because it's revolutionary, but because the Russian bourgeois is also nationalists. Okay, there's a lot of relativity. You have to take into account that all of the circumstances that exist today, even the arrival of Trump into the presidency of the United States, is attributed, or I should say, is the consequence of the absence of a revolutionary movement.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And that's
Trump is the backlash. Trump is the backlash of the 1960s and 70s. Why? Because the 1960s and 70s, the United States was experiencing a scenario, a potential revolutionary crisis. It was experiencing that. And what we have today is really a backlash to that. Don't forget, it took more than a decade for a backlash to occur in Germany after the revolution in Germany. Okay? It took more than a decade for fascism to come in.
yeah.
A backlash can have a late relay. Okay? It may take a while, but it nevertheless constitutes a reaction to that revolutionary potential.
So we just have to step our game up, really step our game up.
Yes, revolutionaries have to, cut the BS and advance the struggle.
Well, the last question I want to ask you, of course, we can't talk about the evil empire in the region of Latin America or the world and the injustices, Latinx people in the U.S. face without talking about the plight of Native Americans, Indigenous Hawaiians, and Indigenous Alaskans. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think it's going to take regarding Southern colonialism? What do you think it's going to take for the left in the U.S., be it the workers' rights movement, feminists, queer liberationists, black leftists, Latinx leftists, anti-imperialists, Palestine justice folks, and those involved in the rights of illegal immigrants to show more urgent solidarity to Native Americans, Indigenous Hawaiians, and Indigenous Alaskans?
We need a movement. Taking me back to the same question. Okay. Those are just specific questions that are of the same problem. Okay. And don't use that illegal immigrant thing again.
Well, do,
They're
well,
undocumented. Okay.
well, do,
Uh,
well, do, well, do.
the only thing that's illegal here, is, because if we want to get into illegal, how about this shitload of white folks that we have in the United States? The Europeans. Okay. They never checked into an immigration office. Okay.
Well, do,
Um,
well, do. No problem.
that's part of the quest. That is part of the quest. I think that a big part of the creation of a movement in the 1960s was the discovery of the concept of solidarity. Okay. Um, when the movement in the 1960s arose and Fred Hampton called for the creation of the Rainbow Coalition, that gave the word solidarity a new definition, you know, and what we need to think about today is how would that apply in the world today? In the United States, it would be no different than what it was in 1969. Just that we would have to be inclusive of the many nationalities that exist in this country since 1969. You have now an influx of Haitians. You have You have, people from Africa, different countries of Africa. You have different people from different parts of Latin America, Asia. Okay. And the other day I met somebody from Malaysia, you know. I mean, so it would mean precisely what Fred Hampton had envisioned, but even more at a higher level.
And then with that, you think you'll definitely see more urgent solidarity being given to
Out
the.
of necessity. Things happen out of necessity.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before we close?
We need to be patient. We
Okay.
need to be patient because it is the innate instinct of human beings to seek a better world. And that's what I'm investing my money on. Okay. That the human instinct for a better world and for them to live without oppressors, that eventually will kick in.
And here's hoping when that happens, Puerto Rico will be free. So
Well, whether I see it or not, I'm live long enough to see it or not. I can see the seeds growing at this time with the events that are occurring right now.
wow. I think that's a perfect place to end. Well, we were joined on this epic edition of One Plus One, our all things Latin America episodes, Latino U.S. episode with young Lord veteran Latinx Puerto Rican leftist and activist and artist. He is an artist, Carlito Rovira. Carlito, I hope that this will be the first of many recordings and conversations we have, both on the air and off the air. And the next time I have you on, we'll dig deeper into the history of Puerto Rico, the odious debt crisis, and the struggle for true independence, as well as looking at both armed resistance and nonviolent resistance. But until then, Carlito, muchos gracias, Senor Comandante.
Thank you very much.
have
Thank you very much.
you have a fantastic rest of the day in New York, and I'm looking forward to uploading this, and we will be in touch. And again, thank you so much, and it was great to finally talk to you voice to voice. So
Thank you. Thank you.